guys, it's Steffi from the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel and welcome to another Books Beside My Bed video. For those of you who are new here, I film one of these every week where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading, and for those who are very familiar with the series, welcome back. This is my reading week from the 20th until the 26th of September. I read a total of 11 things this week. I'm going to talk about most of them, but not everything. I think I've got maybe 9 that I'm going to talk about today. Those 11 books equated to a total of 3,315 pages, and my yearly reading total is up to 312 books. I'm currently on holidays, which is why I have such a high reading count, because I tend to double up on books on days just because I can. And also, if you saw my reading vlog, I had a very flat week. I spent a lot of time reading. But we're going to jump straight into the books now, so get yourself a cup of tea, get comfy. Hopefully this will not be too long. Let's see how we go. The first book that I read this week was actually a reread. It was A Worthy Opponent by Katie Roberts, which is book 3 in the Wicked Villains series. I listened to this on audio for the first time because I was doing things with my hands, so I couldn't actually read the book. I found pretty much that the only way I can listen to audiobooks is one of two ways. I can either sit there with the actual physical book and listen to it, or I have to have already read the book so I know the story in order to listen to the audio. I know the Wicked Villains books pretty well, so I was able to just put that on in the background while I was doing a diamond painting. Anyone who's been following my channel knows a whole lot about the Wicked Villains series because I never shut up about it. It is a fairy tale retelling with the villains as the main characters and the ones who are finding love. And this one happens to be the Hook and Tinkerbell story. It is delightful, and I've talked about it a lot before, so I won't go into it in depth, but it is a marriage of convenience story. It was fun to revisit it. And the audio narrators were Bridget Bordeaux and Jack Callahan, and they did a really great job. So that is a 2020 release from Trinkets and Tales LLC, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read one of my NetGalley arcs, and that was Here to Stay by Adriana Herrera. This is a 2020 release from Carina Press. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars as well. I've really enjoyed it. I do have a review on my blog, so you can check that out at the link below. It is the story of Julia, who moves to Dallas from New York City. Originally, she was chasing a new job and also her boyfriend, but it turns out once she settles in Dallas, her boyfriend ups and leaves her and returns to New York, and she's left there on her own. And she has sort of started to settle into her new job. And the one thing she's really working on is building a friendship base there, because all of her family and her friends are back home, and she really wants to make this work despite everything that has happened. She comes from a Dominican/Puerto Rican family, and so obviously her culture is really, really important to her and a big part of the story. Julia is in Dallas spearheading a charitable foundation on behalf of a big mall, I think, or department store. And as it turns out, this department store is about to go public in its ownership, and so a consultant has been called in to look at the different programs that the department store runs and to assess whether or not they're viable. And one of the funding issues happens to be Julia's foundation that she's running. Enter Rocco, who is also from New York City. The two initially clash, but eventually they begin to find some common ground as Julia starts showing him exactly what her foundation does. I really love this story, not only for the cultural references, which are really good to frame my understanding, because I don't know a lot of Dominican, Puerto Rican families, given where I am in the world. The other thing that I really liked was how Julia really created this sense of found family amongst this friendship group that she manages to create of New York City exiles, or Gotham exiles as they call themselves. And also, the other part that I really liked, lots and lots of descriptions of food. I got very hungry reading this book. Then I read The Roommate by Rosie Dannon. This is a 2020 release from Piatkus, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is the story of Clara Wheaton, who is the daughter of a very sort of famous New York City elite family, and her family is known for poor impulse control and constantly being in the media for completely random things. But Clara has managed to avoid all of that. She stayed out of the spotlight and is sort of this model child until she packs up her life in New York City and moves to LA because the boy that she's been in love with since she was a child has asked her to be his roommate in Los Angeles. And she drops everything to go over there and try and pursue a relationship with this guy until she rocks up in LA and he lets her know that suddenly he's going on tour with his band and he's found her the perfect roommate to stay in the place that they were supposed to be sharing while he's away. Enter Josh, who is very charming, very attractive, and likes to push Clara's buttons. And all of that happens before she learns out that he is an adult performer. I think the blurb on the book says, while Clara and Josh don't agree on much, they do agree that women deserve better sex, and that is sort of the thing that brings them both together as they embark on a bit of a project that will really change sort of their lives, both Josh's performance life, but also Clara's understanding of herself and her world, because she's quite closed off. She's determined not to be that Wheaton child who's constantly in the media, and yet she suddenly finds herself in the middle of something a little bit bigger than herself. This was honestly delightful. It was fun, it was sexy, it was really funny, and I look forward to seeing what Rosie Danan does next. Then I read Future Girl by Asphyxia. This is a 2020 release from Allen and Unwin, which I received as a review copy. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and this is a fantastic young adult, sort of dystopian-ish type book. I say dystopian-ish because it's not post-apocalyptic, but there are some... It is set in the future when there is an oil shortage and a food shortage. It is also set in Melbourne, which is my hometown. Now, I wanted to request this book for 2 reasons. First, it is told like an art journal, so it is full color inside and it has the most beautiful art illustrations and whatnot. The second is that Asphyxia is a deaf writer, artist, and activist. So this book is about a young teen named Piper who is deaf, and all her life her mother has wanted her to pass as hearing and to pass as normal so that she can get a good job and she can succeed in life. And then all of a sudden in Melbourne, there is this shortage of oil, and suddenly people can't get the food that they need. And it really sends sort of Australia into a tailspin. So that's the basic setup of this world. And for Piper, she is desperate to try and find a way to feed herself and her mother. And she comes across Marley, who is a coder or a child of a deaf adult. And he begins to show her or introduce her into growing her own food and being self-sufficient and resilient and reliant on herself. And he also begins to teach her sign language, which she had never learned. It was a really interesting, very insightful story, and I learned a lot from it. And Asphyxia has a really great section at the back of the book where she talks about a little bit about the deaf representation in this book, and also the differences within the deaf community as well, which was very, very interesting. This book was really interesting, and it's such a visual book. It's absolutely gorgeous to look at and to read, so I hope people pick it up. Then I decided to reread Well Met by Jen DeLuca. This was a 2019 release from Berkeley. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I actually read this earlier in the year, and I reread it twice in the year, and I'll probably read it again. This is the kind of book that I finish and want to start reading straight away. I didn't this time because I had other things to read, but trust me, I was seriously tempted. And this is a hate-to-love contemporary romance set amidst a Wren fair. We follow Emily, who has moved to the small town of Willow Creek to help out her older sister who's been in a car accident and needs some help getting around and looking after the house, and also driving her niece to and from different obligations, one of which happens to be the sign-ups for the local Renaissance fair. There, Emily is talked into signing up to the fair and crosses paths with Simon, who is the English teacher at the high school but also the coordinator of the fair, and the two don't hit it off straight away. In fact, they don't get along at all until the fair starts, and Emily, who has become Emma the bar wench, crosses paths with Captain Ian Blackthorne, and very quickly they begin this romance in character, which leaves Emily wondering, does it extend beyond the fair? And it was delightful the second time around. I really, really want to reread this. It's taking everything I can not to just start it again. I also read The Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth Nix. This is his newest release. I received a copy of this from Allen and Unwin for review, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I know last month I had a bit of trouble with Garth Nix book. This one I actually had no trouble reading. It was very, very entertaining. It is set in a slightly alternate London in 1983. Susan has just turned 18 and she's on the hunt to find out who her father is. And while she's out looking for answers, the very first person that she talks to, who happens to be a crime boss, ends up turning to ashes when he's pricked by a silver hat pin. And this leaves Susan with far more questions than answers, and she ends up crossing paths with Merlin, who happens to be a left-handed bookseller. He belongs to a magical family who are in charge of policing the border between the new and old worlds. And there are left-handed booksellers who do the fighting, and there are the right-handed booksellers who are the intellectuals. And they do literally run bookshops, and it's honestly delightful. It was really fun, it was really adventurous, and I quite liked Merlin because he's a very out there character who's just so comfortable in his own skin. So this was fun. There's a lot of sort of mythology and magical creatures woven into this urban fantasy style book. So I will have a full review of this up on my blog tomorrow, so definitely go check it out. Then I read The Aussie Next Door by Stephanie London. This is a 2019 release from Entangled Amara, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is the first book in the Patterson's Bluff series. I think I had downloaded this book on the recommendation of Jodie McAllister when she was doing her daily romance recommendations. I actually had not read very much about it until I started reading it. And then there was one key point, which I'll come to in a minute, that I would have read this book so much faster had I known this, had it been mentioned anywhere in the blurb. So this is the story of American Angie Donovan, who has moved to Australia and is currently on a working visa. And she's moved to the small town of Patterson's Bluff, which is in Victoria. And she loves it there. She's working as a volunteer at the local aged care facility. She is planning all of these activities for the residents there. She's living in a really nice little place next door to a really hot guy who's her landlord, and you know, life is great until she finds out that her visa's run out and that she basically can't stay in the country any longer. And she's desperate to stay. She came to Australia running away from her old life over in the States, and it seems like the only course of action she has is to try and find someone to fall in love with and marry in a very short period of time, a la The Proposal, if you know that film. And this is obviously where Jace, her landlord slash neighbor, comes into it. He is a fantastic character, and he's actually the reason, like, I wish they talked about his character more in the blurb. Jace sits on the autism spectrum. They say that he mentions at the start that he's quite high functioning, but a lot of his character is built around the fact that he likes things to be nice and orderly, and he doesn't like changes in his routine, which consequently Angie disrupts constantly. But the book actually begins with his mother coercing him into dog sitting 2 dogs who completely shake up his routine to begin with. Had I known about the autism rep in this, I would have picked it up straight away, because I'm constantly looking for those types of books. I just wish people would put these things on blurbs. I wish. But it was a fun, enjoyable read. It was nice to read another story set in Australia, particularly in Victoria. So I'm glad that I read it. I know there is a second book in the Patterson's Bluff series, so I may pick that up at some point in the future. Then I read Well Played by Jen DeLuca, which is the second book in the Well Met series. This is a 2020 release from Berkeley, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This actually arrived on Friday at about 9:30, and I'd finished reading it by 2:30, 3 o'clock the same day. That's how my week went. Again, this is another Ren Fair story, and this time we follow Stacey, who became Emily's friend in the first book. And Stacey is in a bit of a rut. She came back to Willow Creek to look after her mother when her mother was unwell, and she never really left. And she's beginning to wonder and question, you know, what she's doing with her life. When everyone else seems to have everything together, she's still doing the same old thing. And during Ren Fair season, she has a standing hookup relationship with one of the performers, Dex, who's a musician, and it's a very no strings attached sort of relationship, until one night after the fair is finished, she gets drunk and she texts Dex and trying to see if there's something more there, because this has been going on for years. What follows is a series of exchanges between Stacey and Dex over the course of a year. They don't see each other, but they're constantly communicating via email, via text message, until Stacey realizes that maybe she's not actually talking and communicating with Dex, and maybe it's somebody else. And we sort of know who it is, because there is a really small hint at the end of Well Met, and also at the start of this book, about who it could be. Yeah, it was interesting, and I think this is one of those books where normally you would expect to see the characters together constantly, because it is a romance and you want to see those characters on the page. And in this case, they spend a good maybe third of the book not together, but exchanging these emails and text messages. So it was fascinating, which is probably why it didn't quite live up to Well Met, but I still really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I really like Stacey as a character, and I like how this relationship really forces Stacey to consider what it is she's doing with her life and what her priorities are by the end of the book. So it was very enjoyable. Very, very desperate now for the third book, which is going to be April and Mitch's book. All right, and the last book that I read this week was Visions of Heat by Nalini Singh. This was originally published in 2007 by Golance. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it is book 2 in the Sight Changeling series. I'm not actually going to talk about it much in this video, because I'm going to do a full video on it. It is the next part of my Sight Changeling review series, but this is the story of Faith Nightstar and Vaughn D'Angelo. Vaughn is one of the Dark River Sentinels, and Faith is a Psy with the ability to see the future, and it is their story. I enjoyed this book more this time around than I did last time, apparently, but it's still not my favorite in the series, but I will be talking more about it in more depth later on, and there are some very interesting things that get set up in this book. which I'd forgotten had happened in book 2. So these are all the books that I've read in the last 7 days. In the comments below, let me know if you have read any of these books or if you're planning on reading them in the future. Alternatively, feel free to let me know something that you have been reading over the last week that you've really enjoyed. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are staying safe and healthy, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye guys.